They came from 40 light-years away with warships the size of mountains, weapons that could split moons, and an intelligence system that had mapped every military base on Earth. They chose Louisiana. Specifically, they chose a town of 2,200 people called Broussard's Landing, where the biggest weekly event was the Friday crawfish boil and where the local welcome sign read, "You hungry? Good. You ain't, we'll fix that." The aliens expected submission. What they got was a pot of gumbo, a second-line parade, and a situation their entire war doctrine had absolutely no category for. If you've ever wondered what happens when the most advanced military force in the galaxy meets people who consider a funeral a reason to cook for 50, you're in the right place. Hit that like button right now, subscribe. Your support helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and drop a comment telling me, could your town survive an alien invasion? Because Broussard's Landing didn't just survive, they made the aliens feel guilty about leaving. Now let's step into this story, because what happened on that Saturday morning in the Louisiana bayou is the reason an entire alien empire marked Earth as "do not attempt," locals too hospitable. Threat level unclassifiable. The Vrethian collective had been watching Earth for 11 years. 11 years of orbital scans, cultural analysis, signal interception, and deep pattern behavioral modeling. They had studied every major city, every military installation, every political power center on the planet. Their threat assessment database contained 4.2 million individual data points on human civilization. Their invasion algorithm had been refined across 37 conquered worlds. By every metric their system could calculate, Earth was ready to fall. Supreme Commander Dax Orvelin stood at the forward observation deck of the flagship Eternal Calculation and looked down at the blue-green planet rotating slowly in the void below. He was a tall figure even by Vrethian standards, angular, precise, with the kind of stillness that came from decades of command. His uniform carried the 7 silver marks of the Outer Expansion campaign. He had taken 6 planets in 11 years. He was very good at this. "Final assessment," he said. His tactical officer, a younger male named Voss, pulled up the holographic summary. Target planet designated Earth, dominant species, human, technological level pre-interstellar. Military organization, fragmented across approximately 195 political units. No unified planetary defense. No orbital weapon systems. Estimated total resistance time before capitulation, 18 to 32 planetary hours. Orvelin studied the map. Landing zone selection? Voss zoomed in on the North American continent. Algorithm recommends primary landing in a region designated Louisiana, southwestern quadrant. Specifically this cluster of small settlements along a water system the locals call the HFY Basin. He paused. The algorithm flagged it as ideal due to low population density, flat terrain for staging, minimal law enforcement infrastructure, and geographical isolation. The surrounding wetlands create a natural containment boundary. Orvelin nodded slowly. And the population? Small, approximately 2,200 in the primary settlement, farming community, low income. Limited communication with larger urban centers. Voss tilted his head slightly. The algorithm rates them as a population unlikely to mount meaningful resistance. What the algorithm had not rated, because the algorithm had no category for it, was the following. The town of Broussard's Landing, Louisiana, had been feeding strangers since 1847. It had survived a hurricane that erased half the parish. It had rebuilt from a flood that put 8 feet of water through every building on Main Street. It had outlasted an oil spill, 2 recessions, and the closure of the only factory within 40 miles. The people of Broussard's Landing did not survive things by fighting them. They survived things by feeding everyone involved, and then figuring out the rest over dessert. The algorithm had also failed to note that on the 3rd Saturday of every month, the entire town gathered at the community center for what locals called the Big Cook, a rotating potluck that had been running continuously since 1962. Attendance was not optional. Absence required a note, a phone call, and a casserole delivered the following week as apology. The invasion was scheduled for a Saturday, a 3rd Saturday. On the morning the Vrethian fleet broke atmosphere, Mama Thibodeaux, Doris Thibodeaux, age 71, retired schoolteacher, sitting president of the Browsards Landing Community Fellowship, and the woman responsible for organizing the Big Cook for the past 22 consecutive years, was standing in her kitchen at 6 in the morning making a roux. A roux, for those unfamiliar, is a mixture of flour and fat cooked slowly over heat until it reaches the precise color of dark chocolate and smells like something between heaven and a warning. It takes 45 minutes of constant stirring. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be left alone. And Mama Thibodeaux had never, in 40 years of cooking, burned a roux. She was not about to let alien invaders change that. The first tremor came at 6:14 a.m. Dishes rattled, the window above the sink vibrated. Mama Thibodeaux tightened her grip on the wooden spoon and kept stirring. Her neighbor, Bobby Arsenault, age 53, crawfish trapper and volunteer deputy, came through her back door without knocking, which was normal, holding his coffee mug in one hand and pointing at the sky with the other. "Doris," he said, "you see them lights? I'm making a roux, Bobby. There's about 40 of 'em big coming down fast. Is the roux burned?" Bobby looked at the pot. "No, ma'am." "Then it can wait." Bobby sat down at the kitchen table, drank his coffee, and watched the roux until it was done. Outside, the lights got closer. The ground shook twice more. A sound like rolling thunder that didn't stop rolled across the bayou. Mama Thibodeaux finished her roux, covered it, turned down the heat, and then walked to the back door and looked up at the sky. 41 Vrethian landing craft descended through the cloud cover in perfect attack formation, their hulls glowing red from re-entry. Their displacement fields pushing a pressure wave across the wetlands that flattened the tall grass in every direction for half a mile. Mama Thibodeaux looked at them for a long moment, then she turned back to Bobby. "How many people you think that is?" Bobby squinted at the ships. "A lot. Better call the fellowship. Tell them to double everything and bring extra folding chairs." Bobby stared at her. "Bobby, go," he went. That was the moment, though no one recognized it yet, when the most sophisticated military campaign in this corner of the galaxy began losing to a woman with a wooden spoon and 40 years of feeding people who showed up unannounced. Supreme Commander Orvelin watched the landing sequence from orbit and felt, for the first time in 11 years of conquest, something strange. He couldn't name it yet. He would have a name for it by sundown, but by then it would be too late. The first Vrethian boots hit Louisiana soil at 6:47 a.m. Recon Squad 7, 12 soldiers in full stealth armor, carrying cloaking devices, atmospheric scanners, and enough firepower to level a city block, landed in the marsh 2 miles east of Browsards, landing along a dirt track locals called Coupe Road. Their orders were standard: infiltrate the settlement, assess civilian response, identify leaders, locate communication infrastructure, and report back before the main force moved in. Squad Commander Reeves Grant, that was the name their translator assigned him. His actual designation in Vrethian was a sound humans couldn't produce, crouched at the tree line and surveyed the road ahead. "Translator active," he said quietly to his unit. "Stealth fields holding, thermal shows no activity on the road. We move in too." What the thermal scanner didn't show was that Coupe Road ran directly past the property of Dale Fontenot, age 64, retired shrimper, current part-time alligator trapper, and a man who had spent 41 years developing what his wife described as an unhealthy relationship with his property line. Dale Fontenot did not have a fence. He had a system, fishing line at ankle height, connected to tin cans at specific intervals. Pressure plates made from plywood and old springs hidden under the grass along the road shoulder. 3 motion-sensitive floodlights salvaged from a gas station that closed in 2009. And a dog named Gator who was half Catahoula, half something the vet refused to classify, and entirely devoted to the principle that strangers on the property were a personal insult. The Vrethian stealth fields rendered the soldiers invisible to human eyes. Gator didn't use his eyes. The first tin can rattled at 6:52 a.m. By 6:53, every floodlight on Dale Fontenot's property had snapped on. Gator was announcing his displeasure to the entire parish. And Dale himself was standing on his back porch in rubber boots and a bathrobe, holding a spotlight in one hand and something long and serious in the other. "Who's out there?" Dale called. The recon squad froze. Their cloaks were active. They were technically invisible. Gator ran directly to Squad Commander Grant and sat on his foot. The cloaking field flickered. "Huh," Dale said. He walked down the porch steps, crossed the yard, and shone his spotlight directly at the space Gator was sitting. For a moment there was nothing. Then the cloak stuttered, a side effect of the atmospheric moisture that the Vrethian engineers had not tested in subtropical humidity, and 12 alien soldiers appeared in Dale Fontenot's backyard. Like a magic trick running in reverse. Dale looked at them for 5 full seconds. "Y'all lost," he said. Squad Commander Grant activated his translator. "We are conducting a geological survey of this region." Dale looked at the rifles. "With them, standard survey equipment." Dale pointed the spotlight at Gator, who was now licking the commander's boot. "Dog seems to like you." He lowered the spotlight slightly. "You boys eat yet?" The translator rendered "eat yet" as a query regarding nutritional intake. Grant responded with what seemed like the appropriate answer. "We do not require sustenance at this time," Dale snorted. "That ain't what I asked." He turned back toward the house. "Edna, we got company, get the biscuits on." From inside came a woman's voice. "How many?" Dale counted. 12, maybe more in the woods. A pause. "I'll do 2 dozen. And that was how Recon Squad 7 of the Vrethian Collective ended up sitting around Dale Fontenot's kitchen table at 7 in the morning eating cathead biscuits with cane syrup. While their commanding officer tried to explain, through a translator not designed for Southern idiom, that they were on a schedule. "Schedule can wait," Dale said, refilling coffee. "Edna's biscuits can't." The Recon Squad had infiltrated 37 settlements across 6 planets. They had never been given coffee. 2 of them discovered they could drink it. One of them, a soldier whose designation translated roughly as the cautious one, asked quietly if there was more syrup. There was more syrup. Grant filed his report to the flagship at 7:23 a.m., 36 minutes behind schedule. The report read, "Civilian population non-hostile. Initial contact resulted in unexpected hospitality protocol. Situation nominal, proceeding with assessment." He did not mention the biscuits. He was not sure how to classify them. Meanwhile, 3 miles west, the main landing force was touching down in the field behind Browsard's Landing Community Center, which was, at that exact moment, filling up with 340 people carrying covered dishes, folding chairs, and enough food to feed everyone they knew plus anyone they happened to meet. Bobby Arsenault had made his calls. The Fellowship had mobilized. And Supreme Commander Dax Orvelin, watching from orbit as his ground forces encountered absolutely no resistance whatsoever, just a town that seemed to be actively welcoming them, felt that strange feeling again, stronger now. The word for it, he would eventually learn, was dread, but the biscuits were just the beginning. Supreme Commander Orvelin deployed his main ground force at 7:45 a.m. 400 Vrethian soldiers in full combat configuration, divided into 6 tactical units, moved on Browsard's Landing from 4 directions simultaneously. It was a textbook encirclement, the same formation that had broken the capital of the Helix Compact in under 2 hours. Disciplined, overwhelming. Designed to create instant psychological surrender in any civilian population. The 6 units converged on the town center at 8:02 a.m. They found a parking lot full of pickup trucks. A hand-painted banner that said, "Third Saturday Big Cook, all welcome," and 340 people who looked up from their card tables and cast iron pots and immediately began waving them over. Ground Commander Miles Hargrove, Orvelin's senior field officer, a decorated veteran of the outer expansion, stopped his unit at the edge of the parking lot and stared. His tactical display showed no weapons fire, no fortifications, no evacuation. The civilians had not run. They had not hidden. They were, by every sensor reading available, setting up additional folding tables. "What is this?" Hargrove said. His translator specialist said carefully, "I believe they are eating, sir. They know we're here. They appear to, yes." A large man in an apron, this was Big Ray Trosclair, age 58. Pitmaster, former offensive lineman. Current president of the Browsard's Landing Volunteer Fire Department. Walked straight across the parking lot toward Hargrove's unit with both arms open and a grin the size of the Mississippi. Hey now, welcome, welcome, y'all coming for the cook. We got jambalaya, we got crawfish etouffee, we got boudin, we got smothered pork chops. And Miss Celestine just pulled 3 dozen sweet potato pies out the oven 20 minutes ago. He stopped in front of Hargrove and stuck out a hand. Ray Trosclair, I run the pit, you hungry? Hargrove stared at the hand. His translator was processing. We are soldiers of the Vrethian Collective, Hargrove said. This settlement is now under Dominion authority. You will. Yeah, sure, Big Ray said pleasantly. You want dark meat or white meat on the chicken? We also got a whole smoked alligator if your boys are feeling adventurous. There was a long pause in the Vrethian ranks. Smoked alligator, Hargrove repeated. 22 pounds. Been on the pit since midnight, it's ready. Ray looked past Hargrove at the 400 soldiers standing in formation. Your people eat, 'cause we got plenty. Always do. The thing about 400 soldiers who had been in atmospheric transit for 6 hours was that they had, in fact, not eaten since before launch. Vrethian military rations were efficient and nutritionally complete. They were also, by any meaningful definition, terrible. The smell coming from the Browsards Landing Community Center parking lot was something their ration packs had never, in the entire history of the collective, come close to producing. Hargrove opened a private channel to Orvelin. Commander, we have a situation. Report. The civilian population is not surrendering. Then compel them. They're feeding us, sir. Static. Then clarify. They've set up what appears to be a large communal eating event, and they are actively inviting our soldiers to participate. One civilian is currently describing a smoked reptile. More static. Hargrove, Orvelin said carefully, establish authority, secure the perimeter. Do not, but Hargrove never finished receiving that order, because at that moment, Private First Class Connor Webb, 22 years old, his first deployment, had not slept in 19 hours, took one step toward the food table because the smell of Big Ray's smoked alligator had reached the part of his brain that existed before military training. Before the collective, before any doctrine or protocol. He took one step, then another, and then 399 other soldiers followed him, because they were all, at the molecular level, hungry in a way that no invasion briefing had addressed. Hargrove stood alone at the edge of the parking lot and watched his entire ground force drift toward the food tables of Browsards Landing, Louisiana, like a tide going in a direction nobody planned. He closed his channel to Orvelin. He looked at Big Ray, who was already handing him a plate. What, Hargrove said, is etouffee? Big Ray smiled. Son, sit down. This is gonna take a minute to explain, and you're gonna want to be comfortable when you try it. Meanwhile, Mama Thibodeaux had not been idle. While Big Ray handled the parking lot, she had quietly organized the most efficient hospitality operation Browsards Landing had ever run. 12 women, ages ranging from 31 to 78, circulated through the grounds with serving spoons, sweet tea pitchers, and the particular kind of focused generosity that looks effortless and is anything but. Every Vrethian soldier who sat down got a plate. Every plate had something on it they had never tasted. And every time one of them looked up from their food, with an expression that could only be described as confused wonder. There was a Browsards Landing resident right there to refill their tea and ask about their family. The Vrethian translation systems were not equipped for Louisiana conversational rhythm. Where y'all from? The Vrethian Collective, outer arm of the... Aw, that's nice. You got people there. Family, I have a unit designation and 3 confirmed genetic contributors. That's family, honey. You want more cornbread? By 9:15 a.m., Ground Commander Hargrove had eaten 2 full plates, was halfway through a third, and had learned more about crawfish biology from a retired shrimper named Pete Fontenot than he had learned about Earth in 11 years of orbital surveillance. He had also, somehow, agreed to help Pete haul a pirogue out of the marsh after the cook was done. He wasn't entirely sure how that had happened. On the flagship, Supreme Commander Orvelin watched his tactical display with the growing awareness that something had gone profoundly, fundamentally wrong, and that he couldn't identify a single moment when it had started. His ground force was not fighting. His recon team was not reporting. His encirclement formation was sitting at folding tables eating sweet potato pie, and the civilians were not afraid. That was the part that troubled him most. In 37 conquests, civilians were always afraid. These people weren't afraid, they were hospitable, and somehow that was worse. At 10:30 a.m., Supreme Commander Dax Orvelin made a decision. If the ground force couldn't establish authority, he would do it himself. He deployed the Presence Protocol, a tactic reserved for populations requiring maximum psychological impact. His personal shuttle descended from the flagship in full display mode. Running lights blazing, displacement field active, hull panels open to reveal the external weapon arrays. It was the kind of entrance that had made entire city populations drop to their knees on 5 different worlds. His shuttle landed in the center of the Browsard's Landing Community Center parking lot at 10:44 a.m. The ramp lowered with dramatic mechanical precision. Steam rolled out. Orvelin descended in full command armor, flanked by his personal guard, his translator active, his bearing projecting the full weight of an empire that spanned 40 star systems. 340 civilians looked up from their plates. Then Mama Thibodeaux walked across the parking lot with 2 things in her hands, a sweet potato pie and a plastic fork. She stopped at the bottom of the ramp. She looked up at Orvelin for a moment, at the armor, the guards, the weapons arrays, the blazing lights. Then she held up the pie. "You eat yet," she said. Orvelin's translator delivered the phrase. He stared at the small woman in front of him. "I am Supreme Commander Dax Orvelin of the Vrethian Collective. This planet is hereby claimed under Expansion Protocol 7. Mama Thibodeaux nodded patiently. "That's real nice. The pie's still warm." A sound moved through the crowd. It took Orvelin's translator a moment to classify it. It was laughter, not mocking laughter, not frightened laughter. The easy, warm laughter of people watching something that felt familiar and funny in a way that didn't require explanation. Orvelin felt something he had not felt in years of command. His certainty shifted just slightly, like a foundation that wasn't quite as solid as it had looked. "Bring me your leaders," he said. Mama Thibodeaux considered this. "Well, that depends what you need 'em for. If it's the big cook, that's me. If it's the fire department, that's Ray. If it's the parish council, Gerald Melankin's over by the Boudin table, but I'll warn you he talks slow. Good man." "Talks slow? I require the individual with supreme authority over this settlement." Mama Thibodeaux thought about it. "I'd say that's Father Mike, but he's blessing the food right now, and you really don't want to interrupt that." Behind Orvelin, the personal guard shifted. He raised one hand slightly, a signal for patience, and looked at this woman this small. 71-year-old woman who was holding a pie and had not taken a single step back since he'd walked down the ramp. "Are you not afraid?" he said. It came out quieter than he intended. Mama Thibodeaux looked at him with the steady eyes of a woman who had raised 4 children, buried a husband, rebuilt a kitchen after a flood, and fed a grieving town through 3 different disasters. "Baby," she said, "I've been afraid of plenty of things in my life, but you showed up on a Saturday and we got food and everybody's sitting down. So far, that's a good day." Orvelin didn't have an answer for that. That was when Big Ray materialized at his elbow with a plate. "Commander," Ray said, he'd gotten the rank from Hargrove, "you need to try this etouffee. I'm not asking. I'm telling you as a man who has cooked this recipe for 30 years. You need to try this." And Supreme Commander Dax Orvelin, conqueror of 6 worlds, commander of a fleet of 41 warships, holder of the Vrethian Expansion Medal First Class, looked at the plate. The etouffee was golden orange, glossy, rich, built from a base of butter and Trinity, and 20 years of Ray's specific knowledge of exactly how much cayenne changes everything. It smelled like something that had no equivalent in 40 star systems of culinary experience. Orvelin took the fork. His personal guard watched in stunned silence. He took one bite. The Vrethian Collective had a dedicated sensory analysis division that cataloged experiences across conquered worlds. They had 2.4 million data points on human food culture. Not one of them had prepared him for this. He stood in the middle of the parking lot in full command armor and ate the etouffee. Nobody attacked him. Nobody ran. Around him, his soldiers and the civilians of Browsard's Landing sat together at folding tables in the Louisiana morning. And the smell of wood smoke and crawfish, and something deep and slow-cooked, moved through the air like it owned the place. Which Orvelin was beginning to understand it did. "What is this made from?" he said finally. Big Ray grinned. "That's the Holy Trinity, Commander. Onion, celery, bell pepper. Everything good in Louisiana starts there." Orvelin looked at the empty plate. Then he looked at Ground Commander Hargrove, who was 20 feet away, now on his fourth plate, engaged in what appeared to be a heated debate with Pete Fontenot about the correct water temperature for boiling crawfish. "Hargrove," Orvelin called. Hargrove looked up. "Sir?" "Report." Hargrove set down his fork. He stood up. He straightened his uniform. He walked over with the careful posture of a man trying to look like he hadn't just spent 2 hours eating instead of conquering. "Sir," he said, "the civilian population has been fully cooperative." "In what sense?" "In the sense that they fed us, sir, all of us. And then they started asking us questions." "What kind of questions?" Hargrove paused. "Personal questions, sir, about our families, our home systems. What the stars look like from where we come from." He paused again. "Private Webb apparently told a woman named Miss Celestine that he misses his mother, and she gave him a second slice of pie and told him she'd pray for him." Orvelin looked at his tactical display. His encirclement formation was now a scatter pattern around 15 folding tables. His recon team was still at Dale Fontenot's house. His flagship was in geosynchronous orbit above a town that was feeding his entire invasion force. He had no idea how to file this report. "Sir," Hargrove said, lowering his voice, "what are your orders?" Orvelin looked at the plate in his hand. Then he looked at Mama Thibodeaux, who was now moving through the tables with a pitcher of sweet tea, stopping at each one, refilling glasses, asking names, remembering them. He had a fleet. He had protocols. He had 37 successful conquests on his record. And he was standing in a parking lot in Louisiana eating etouffee and losing a war he hadn't even started yet. "I need to think," he said. Big Ray appeared again. "Want more pie while you think?" Orvelin turned slowly to look at him. Ray held up both hands, completely unintimidated. "Offer stands." And that was when the situation shifted in a direction nobody, not the aliens, not the collective's intelligence division, not any tactical model ever devised, had accounted for. Because while Orvelin was thinking, Mama Thibodeaux was organizing. And when Mama Thibodeaux organized, things happened. Mama Thibodeaux had been organizing Broussard's Landing for 22 years. She had organized disaster relief after Hurricane Rita. She had organized the rebuild after the flood of 2016. She had organized 3 separate community fundraisers, the annual blessing of the fleet, the parish Christmas drive, and every third Saturday without exception, the big cook. She organized the way other people breathed, naturally, continuously, and without anyone quite noticing until the thing was already done. By 11:15 a.m., she had quietly assigned every alien soldier at the tables a local resident as a conversation partner. Not guards, not minders, neighbors. People with names and stories, and the specific Louisiana talent for making strangers feel like they'd been expected. Private Connor Webb, 22 years old, first deployment, was sitting with Miss Celestine Arsenault, age 73, who was showing him pictures of her grandchildren and explaining the difference between a pirogue and a canoe in a way that had him genuinely interested. Ground Commander Hargrove was still with Pete Fontenot, who had moved from crawfish biology to a detailed account of the 2018 alligator season and showed no signs of stopping. 3 soldiers from Unit 4 had somehow ended up helping Bobby Arsenault set up a second dessert table, carrying sheet cakes with the focused care of people who understood that something important was happening and didn't want to mess it up. And Supreme Commander Orvelin was sitting across from Big Ray Trosclair, holding his 3rd cup of coffee, learning about the history of Cajun food in the Louisiana bayou in a way that was, against every reasonable expectation, genuinely fascinating. "So your people were pushed out," Orvelin said. Ray nodded. "Expelled from Nova Scotia in 1755, British said go, so they went. Ended up down here in the swamps and marsh, and everybody figured that was the end of them." He shrugged. "Instead, they looked at what they had, which wasn't much, and they made something with it. Built a whole culture, food, music, language, all out of what other people threw away." Orvelin was quiet for a moment. "They survived. More than survived," Ray said. "They thrived. 'Cause that's what people do when they got community. You got each other, you can make something out of nothing." Orvelin set down his coffee cup. He looked around the parking lot, at his soldiers, at the civilians, at the folding tables and the smoke rising from the pits, and the easy back and forth of people who had started the morning as strangers, and were no longer quite that. My people, he said slowly, have never, he stopped, Ray waited. In 37 campaigns, Orvelin said, no one has ever simply welcomed us. Ray looked at him steadily. Maybe that's a sign. Before Orvelin could answer, his communication unit crackled. It was his intelligence officer on the flagship. Commander. We have a developing situation. Report. Social media, sir. Apparently several civilians have been posting about the event since early morning. The content is spreading rapidly across human communication networks. What content? Images and video of our soldiers eating, sir, at the folding tables. Some of them are smiling. Orvelin closed his eyes briefly. And one post is currently leading human network trends. It says, aliens invaded Browsard's Landing and Mama Thibodeaux fed every single one of them. Score, Louisiana 1, Galaxy 0. There was silence on the channel. It has 400,000 shares, sir, in the last 2 hours. Orvelin looked across the parking lot. He could see Mama Thibodeaux accepting what appeared to be a hug from a Vrethian soldier twice her height. She patted him on the arm and told him something that made his translator light blink 3 times. Sir, the intelligence officer continued, human media units are now arriving on the perimeter. Several large transport vehicles with signal equipment. They appear to be broadcasting. Broadcasting what? The big cook, sir. Apparently a human journalist asked if he could broadcast, and Mrs. Thibodeaux said, and I quote, honey, the more the merrier, just bring a dish. Orvelin put his head in his hands. This was not in any protocol. This was not in any contingency file. In 37 conquests, the invasion had always controlled the information. The message was always, overwhelming force, immediate compliance, resistance is futile. The message currently being broadcast to the entire human planet was 400 Vrethian soldiers eating crawfish etouffee at a community potluck in Louisiana. Sir, the intelligence officer said carefully, the human political leadership is also responding. We are receiving communications from multiple governmental entities. They are not military communications. What are they? A pause. They appear to be complaints that Browsard's Landing got the aliens before anyone else did, sir. The human entity designated Louisiana governor has released a statement saying, and I quote, we knew if anyone could handle this, it was the people of the bayou. That's Louisiana for you. Orvelin looked up at the sky. His fleet was still there. 41 warships, more firepower than this planet had produced in its entire technological history. And he was losing not to weapons, not to strategy, not to military force of any kind, but to a potluck. He stood up. Ray stood with him. You need something, Commander? I need, Orvelin said carefully, to speak with Mrs. Thibodeaux. Ray nodded. She's over by the pie table. Fair warning, she's gonna offer you another slice. I'm aware. He walked across the parking lot, through the folding tables, past his soldiers. Decorated veterans of 6 planetary campaigns, who were laughing at things Pete Fontenot was saying, or helping carry dishes, or listening to Miss Celestine talk about her grandchildren. They were not afraid, they were not uncomfortable. They were, in the specific and undeniable way of people who have been fed and spoken to like human beings for 4 hours. Starting to feel something that his expansion briefings had never prepared them for. They were starting to feel at home. Orvelin reached the pie table. Mama Thibodeaux looked up at him with the patient, steady eyes he had already learned to take seriously. Mrs. Thibodeaux, he said. Commander, she said, I need to understand something. He looked at the table, at the pies and the cakes and the covered dishes still arriving from cars in the parking lot. You knew who we were this morning, you knew what we came for. I had a pretty good idea, she said, and you fed us anyway. She looked at him like the answer was obvious. Course I did. You showed up, that's what we do. Why? Mama Thibodeaux picked up a piece of pecan pie and put it on a plate and held it out to him. Because hungry people make bad decisions, she said. And I figured whatever you came here to do could wait until everybody had eaten. Orvelin took the plate. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he sat down at the pie table across from Mama Thibodeaux, and he said something that no supreme commander of the Vrethian collective had ever said in the history of the expansion campaign. "I think," he said, "we may have made a mistake." And Mama Thibodeaux nodded slowly and said, "Well, it ain't too late to fix it. Have some pie and let's talk." The Vrethian fleet remained in orbit above Browsard's landing for 3 more days, not because they were preparing a second assault. Not because they were waiting for reinforcements. They stayed because Mama Thibodeaux had pointed out, very reasonably, that leaving in the middle of a conversation was rude. And because Ground Commander Hargrove had promised Pete Fontenot he'd help haul that pirogue, and a promise was a promise. The official record of what was said at the pie table between Supreme Commander Dax Orvelin and Doris Thibodeaux has never been fully released, partly because Orvelin requested discretion, and partly because Mama Thibodeaux said that what was spoken over food was between the people who ate it. But the broad strokes became known over time in the way that things always become known in small towns. She hadn't argued strategy. She hadn't made threats. She had asked him very simply what he was looking for. In 11 years of conquest across 37 worlds, what was the collective actually trying to find? Orvelin, to his own surprise, had answered honestly: resources, security. Proof across the expanding frontier that the collective was strong enough to survive in a galaxy that had never been particularly kind to anyone. Mama Thibodeaux had listened carefully. Then she'd said that sounded exhausting, and that in her experience, the things people needed most, safety, belonging, a place at the table, weren't things you took from other people. They were things you built together if you were smart about it. She'd refilled his coffee. He'd had a 4th piece of sweet potato pie. And by the time the sun went down on that Saturday, something in the posture of Supreme Commander Dax Orvelin had changed in a way that 41 warships and the entire expansion protocol couldn't explain. The withdrawal order was issued at 9:02 a.m. on Tuesday. It was the quietest withdrawal in the history of the collective. No speeches, no declarations. No formal announcement of defeat, because what had happened in Browsard's landing didn't fit any existing military category. The collective's official log simply noted, "Campaign Earth suspended pending reassessment. Recommend diplomatic approach. Cultural resistance level, unprecedented." One intelligence analyst, filing a supplemental note to the official record, wrote, "Population demonstrated advanced community cohesion, significant culinary capability, and an apparently unlimited capacity for hospitality under pressure. Standard psychological warfare techniques ineffective. Recommend no further action. These people will feed us and then tell our children stories." Private Connor Webb cried a little when Miss Celestine said goodbye. She gave him a sealed container of pecan pralines and told him there was always a chair at her table if he came back decent. He told his unit for the next 6 months that he had something in his eye. Ground Commander Hargrove did help Pete haul the pirogue. They went out on the water at dawn on Monday, before the withdrawal order came through, and Pete showed him where the crawfish traps were, and they didn't talk much, and it was, Hargrove would say later, the best morning he'd had in 11 years of service. When he got back to the ship, he submitted a transfer request to the diplomatic division. He was accepted. The Vrethian ship that Big Ray asked about, the one his displacement field had cracked a corner of the community center parking lot when it landed, was quietly repaired by 3 of Orvelin's engineers over Sunday afternoon. Ray had mentioned it once, not as a complaint, just as a fact. The engineers showed up the next morning with equipment. Ray made them breakfast. Before Orvelin left, he stood in the parking lot one last time. Mama Thibodeaux was there. Of course she was. "You know," he said, "my cultural assessment division spent 11 years studying your planet. They had 4.2 million data points." She said. "They missed everything important." She smiled. "They weren't sitting at the table." He nodded slowly. He extended his hand. He'd learned the gesture from Hargrove, who'd learned it from Big Ray. Mama Thibodeaux shook it with the firm, warm grip of a woman who meant it. "Mrs. Thibodeaux," he said, "I believe Earth is in good hands." "Always has been," she said. "Come back sometime." "Bring a dish." He laughed. He hadn't laughed in years. The fleet rose at 9:02 and was gone by 9:47, and Browsard's landing went back to what it had always done. The folding tables were put away. The parking lot was swept. The leftover boudin was divided and sent home with anyone who wanted some. 3 weeks later, Mama Thibodeaux received a package. It arrived in her front yard at 6 in the morning. No ship, no fanfare, just a container sitting on her porch steps when she opened the door. Inside was a single item, a jar of something deep amber and crystalline with a small note attached. The note said, in careful, translated English, "We do not have a word for what you gave us." The closest translation is something between welcome and enough. Thank you. She set it on her kitchen windowsill where the morning light caught it and turned it gold. Then she put the kettle on, got out her spoon and started her roux, because it was Saturday, and there were people to feed. Before you go, if this story hit different, if it made you feel something, drop a comment below and tell me what your favorite part was. Was it Mama Thibodeaux at the ramp, Big Ray and the Etouffee, Miss Celestine and the Pralines? Share this with somebody who needs a good story today. And please subscribe because your support helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Hit that button and stay with us. There are more worlds out there. And somewhere in this galaxy, someone is always about to knock on the wrong door. We'll be here when they do.